Welcome back to Champions and Beyond. In this video, we are going to show you what you get inside the core box of Marvel Champions. So in the core box of Marvel Champions, you get two books. The first one is your quick start guide, your learn to play guide. In this, it will run through the components that you get, how to create the dials, and then it runs through all the stages of a game, giving examples, right the way through to the villain stage. And then it will come up with the different types of cards that you get. And it comes up with a pre-constructed deck for the 5 heroes that are in the core box. And then some information on deck construction and some other general hints and tips. This book is very well laid out. For the first few games that you play, there's a chance that you'll be referring to it quite a lot, but it is very easy to read. It's very easy to understand. It is a very good tool when you're starting out the game. The second book you get is the rules reference guide. Now, for just the core set and for probably the first few packs, the rules reference guide will be absolutely fine. As your collection starts to grow, the rules reference guide will no longer cover a lot of the questions that you may have. Currently, we are up to rules reference guide 1.5, which is free to download from the FFG website, and you can get printed off online. This is a much more in-depth look at a lot of the rules. There's been a lot of different things that have come up over the years, lots of different questions. Generally, the bigger version, the newer version, isn't necessary when you're starting out the game. The shorter version that you get here still has a lot of information in it, still has a lot of rulings, and will be absolutely fine for starting off the game. When you open the box, you'll get 3 to 4 punch boards. Once you've punched all the pieces out of that, these are the components that you will receive. You get your first player token, you get acceleration tokens, you get your damage, threat, and general tokens. Damage and threat are in denominations of 1, 3, and 5, and the generalized tokens are in 1s and 3s. You get enough pieces to make up 1 larger villain dial and 4 smaller hero dials. So this is enough to play a 4-player game. You also then receive a baggie, just a generalized baggie, with your tough, confused, and stunned status cards. All of the pieces are cardboard, and they will take a lot of use throughout the games. At some point, the tokens mainly will start to wear out. Definitely some of my threat tokens are now starting to fall apart. These can be replaced with premium tokens at a much later date, but it's not something you need to worry about when you're starting out the game. The miscellaneous cards you will also receive within the box is double-sided player aid cards. The blue side is the hero phase and the red side is the villain phase. Runs through all the actions you can do in the hero phase and then runs through the order of play for the villain phase. You then have the 3 other cards. Don't have a ton of use, but what they contain is a bit nice artwork on the back. They then receive the deck lists for the pre-built Captain Marvel aggression deck, the Spider-Man Justice deck, and Rhino's starting deck when you start up the game. The core box comes with 5 heroes. Now the way a hero kit works is you'll get a double-sided identity card with your alter ego and your hero. You get generally 15 signature cards which have to be in your deck when you build a deck for the hero. You get an obligation and a nemesis set. Obligation and nemesis tend to be a combined total of 6 cards. So per hero kit, you have a total of 22 cards. Now the 5 you get in the box, you get Peter Parker Spider-Man, Carol Danvers Captain Marvel, Tony Stark Iron Man, Jennifer Walters She-Hulk, and T'Challa the Black Panther. You get 3 villains, 3 scenarios within the core set. The story behind each of the scenarios do link together. If you've played games like Arkham or any other kind of campaign games where things carry on, although this has a story, it doesn't have those kind of elements, not within the core set anyway. So the first scenario is Rhino, and he is trying to break into a shield facility and steal vibranium. The story behind it is his buyer, or the person that he's trying to steal the vibranium for, is Claw, who is your second scenario. And then Claw is trying to sell the vibranium on to Ultron, who is your third scenario. Within the core set, the scenarios do definitely go up in a fair amount of difficulty, and Ultron is definitely a far more challenging villain to take on when you only have a core set. But it is doable. There are decks that use just core set cards that can beat Ultron. The first 2 modular encounter sets you get within the core set are probably the most important in the game. They are the Standard, which is a 7-card encounter set, and the Expert, which is a 3-card encounter set. There is currently only 1 scenario in the game that does not use these encounter sets, so again, these are going to be used constantly while you're playing the game. You then also receive another 5 modular encounter sets that can be swapped in and out of any scenario. You have the Bomb Scare, which is the recommended modular for Rhino. Plays a lot around confusing the heroes and doing damage if you're confused. One of the easiest modular sets within the game. You then have Masters of Evil. Masters of Evil adds some beefier minions into your game, all with special effects and that sort of thing. It's the recommended modular for Claw. The third encounter set is Under Attack. Now this is the recommended modular for Ultron, and it contains extra cards that either beef up the villain or make it do extra attacks, extra attachments, that sort of thing, to make a villain harder. It's also a 5-card encounter set, so it's very small, which means that you'll get more of a villain-specific cards coming out of their encounter deck. The 4th encounter set is Legions of Hydra. In that, it has Madam Hydra as quite a big minion. as well as 2 side schemes called Legions of Hydra. Madam Hydra can't take any damage while one of the Legions of Hydra side schemes are out, so she gets her own protection, and it can be a very annoying modular encounter set. Although it's not recommended for any of the core set, it is a recommended modular in the Rise of the Red Skull, which was the first campaign expansion box. The 5th and final module that you get within the core set is the Doomsday Chair and MODOK. Again, a couple of side schemes that will drag MODOK out of the discard pile. MODOK has Retaliate 2, so every time you hit him, you take 2 damage. And he's got 8 life. He is very much he's very much the biggest minion that you can get within the core set. And as I said before, each of these side schemes can be thrown into any particular scenario. So if Rhino is too easy with the bomb scare, why not add Legions of Hydra? He already has some Hydra mercenaries helping him out, break into the shield facility to steal the vibranium. This will just add a couple more Hydra soldiers. This will add Madam Hydra. It adds the side schemes. Thematically it works, and it would make the encounter more difficult. They were also listed in the core set as difficulty 1 to 5 in this order. They did not do that for every single set that came with encounter sets, so it's very subjective as you go on as to what fits where, really. But as far as the designers were concerned, this was the difficulty rating of these 5. So there are 5 different types of aspect cards that you have within the game. There are 4 aspects. These are leadership, which mainly revolves around allies. You have protection, which really concentrates on defense. You have aggression, which concentrates on attack, and you have justice, which concentrates on thwarting. You then have basic cards, which can be mixed into any deck to help supplement what you're doing within your chosen aspect. So to begin with, the basic aspect cards that you received within the core set. Each basic card comes with a total of 4 copies. Or you receive 4 of each of the double resources. So you have strength, you have genius, and you have energy. These are all max 1 per deck, so you have enough within the core set to build 4 separate decks. You then had 1 basic upgrade within the game, and that was tenacity. Tenacity was used, you pay 2, you put it into play, and then you can pay a physical resource at a later date to ready your hero to give you a second activation. Because they're in basic, they can still be useful. Not every aspect has ways to help a hero ready up, and if you want to play with a hero that you want to have ready multiple times, it can be useful. There are better ways to do it later on, and more situational ways to do it later on in the game's life cycle. Tenacity was also never reprinted in any set to date. You received 2 different supports within basic for the core set. The first being Avengers Mansion. 4 cost support, you put it into play, and then every turn you can exhaust it to draw you an additional card. It is one per player to have in play, but it isn't a unique card, so you could have up to 3 copies in a single deck, but you could only ever play one of them. The same goes for a Helicarrier. That's a 3-cost support, and from then on you can exhaust it to reduce the cost of the next card that a certain player plays. These are great supports for multiplayer because everybody at the table can have one, and they are actions, so you can choose if you have a good enough hand that you don't need the extra card or you don't need the discount, that you can give that to another player at the table. These are both very good supports. They were reprinted in a couple of different packs, but they are still staple cards for a lot of players. You received 2 different basic allies within the core set. You have Mockingbird, who is a 3-cost ally, comes into play and will stun an enemy, then has a 1/1/3 stat line, so 1 thwart, 1 attack, and 3 life. Again, very much a staple card when you're starting out the game. Very useful to stun the enemy and stop them from attacking you. The other basic ally that came within the core set was Nick Fury. So Nick Fury is a 4-cost ally, so very expensive, but he has one of 3 different responses when he comes into play. He can either draw you 3 cards, he can deal 4 damage to an enemy, or he can remove 2 threat from a scheme. He then does leave play at the end of the round, so you tend to put him out, you use whichever ability you feel is most useful, you thwart for 2 or attack for 2, and then you tend to throw him as a blocker against the enemy's attack. He's a 2/2/3, so 2 thwart, 2 attack, 3 life. You then received copies of 3 different basic events within the core set. You received a card called Emergency. 0-cost event. Whenever threat would be placed onto the main scheme, you can play that to prevent 1 threat. It's a very situational card. There are some heroes that do benefit from the interrupt nature. It is now possibly outpaced by certain other cards, especially in Justice. But for core set aggression that doesn't really have a lot of ways to deal with threat, it was a very good option to help you manage what threat was going out onto the board. You received 4 copies of First Aid. First Aid is a 1-cost event, and you can heal 2 damage from a friendly character. So you could do that on your hero, or you could do that on a very important ally that's out there and doing work for you. There are certain allies within the other aspects that this could benefit. Still a good card when you have a full collection, although it tends to be favoured more with either protection or leadership when you're working with a particular ally. You also received 4 copies of Haymaker. Haymaker is a 2-cost event, and you deal 3 damage to an enemy. Again, for core set, when you had little options within the other aspects, protection or justice that needed extra damage to help you actually win the game, these were a very useful card when you're starting out your Marvel Champions experience. So for your basic cards, you get 44 total, 11 by title. For each of the 4 aspects, you receive between 18 and 19 cards for each aspect. First of all, leadership. So you get a resource card for leadership, which is the power of leadership. You get 2 copies of these. These are max 2 per deck. It generates a single resource or 2 resources when you're paying for another blue card. We said before that leadership was mainly revolved around allies at the beginning. You got 3 allies. You got Hawkeye, which was a 3-cost ally, 113 stats. But what he was great for, he comes in with 4 arrow counters. Whenever a minion enters play, you get to take an arrow counter off and just deal 2 damage to that minion, potentially killing it before it does anything, or damaging it ready for your hero to take care of when it's back to the hero phase. Great ally for the starter. Very good against Ultron in the opening games. Very good all-round ally. Second ally you got was Maria Hill. Still considered a very overpowered ally. 2 cost for a 2-1-2 stat line. So having that 2 thwart was massive. Being able to come in for 2, thwart for 2, and then defend. That's already good. But she has a response after she enters play. And this is enters play from anywhere. It doesn't have to be from your hand like some later allies. Whenever she enters play, every player at the table gets to draw a card. So for 2 cost, in a 4-player game, all of those 4 players will get to draw a card, give you more resources, give you more options for things to do. She'll be able to thwart for 2 and then hang around for a blocker when it gets to the villain phase. The third ally you got was Vision. He was a 4-cost, 1-2-3 stat line. Expensive, especially compared to the others here. But what you could do is you can spend a lightning resource on your turn and he gets +2 to both of his stats, so he becomes a 3-4. So you pump him up, you let him do a lot of work for you, hopefully heal him with first aid. You then got 1 upgrade with leadership, and that was Inspired. Now, Inspired was an upgrade that you actually didn't play on your hero, but you played on your allies, and it gives them 1-1 to their stat line. So once they come into play, you pay 1, you put the Inspired onto them, and suddenly Vision is a 2-3 at base. You then pump his stats up, he becomes a 4-5. Very good upgrade. Limit once per ally. You got 1 support within the blue aspect, and that was the Triskelion. So again, wanting to increase your ally limit, this allows you to have up to 4 allies on the field instead of just 3. With the base set, blue was the only way for you to have up to 6 allies in your deck. You get the 3 for blue, the 2 basics, and you get your signature. So having that option to get more allies out was obviously a bonus. You got 3 events within the core set. The first one was Make the Call. You receive 3 copies of. Make the Call allows you to search a player's discard pile for an ally and pay its resource cost to put it into play. So this is why I say about Maria Hill not having to be played from hand. You can do the Maria Hill turn 1, and then on turn 2 you can have Make the Call in hand. You can make the call, bring Maria Hill back, draw the cards again for the table, do another 2 thwart, do another block. This is slightly more flexible because it allows you to search any player's discard pile. So it'll allow you to get an ally that's very useful in a different aspect and be able to then increase their stats or use them in conjunction with other leadership cards. The second event you got was Lead from the Front, 2-cost event, and every character the A player controls, so you can play it on any player at the table. Every character that player controls gets +1/+1 for the phase. So again, you play it on yourself and suddenly you've got Vision with an Inspired, taking him to a 2/3. You play and make the call, you take him up to a 3/4. You then pump his stats up, you can take him up to a 5/6. This really goes to show how leadership can really bring the best out of allies. The third and final event that you got was Get Ready. You got 3 copies. Get Ready, 0-cost event, and just ready's an ally. So saying with everything you could do with Vision, for example, you could pump him up to a 6 attack once with him, play Get Ready, and attack a second time, doing 12 damage in total. You're likely to take out stages of villains with that amount. Just another really good card to play into the whole ally aspect of leadership. On to protection. So the protection resource card is the Power of Protection. Very similar to leadership. They actually all are. Every aspect has one of these. So generates a single resource or 2 resources if you're paying for a green protection card. Again, 2 copies, limit 2 per deck. You get 2 allies, so you get Black Widow. So 3 cost, 2/1/2. So good 2 thwart, but low health. She has a response where if you draw a treachery card out in the villain phase, you can spend a mental resource to cancel that treachery card. Very good for some nasty treacheries early on. For the core set, very useful ally. And that 2 thwart, again in protection, that didn't have the greatest way to do the thwart, was a very useful option. The second ally you got is Luke Cage. So he's a 4/1/2/5. So 5 health, but he also comes in with toughness. So he comes in, he can either do a free hit or a free block your first turn, soak up that tough, and then start doing the extra work. His attack, although it is a 2 attack, he takes 2 consequential damage. So he will only get a total of 3 hits in if you choose to use him that way. 4 hits if you decide to soak the first one with that tough. But again, it was a way of dealing damage or getting double defenses early on in the game's life cycle. You got 2 upgrades with protection. The first one was Armored Vest. You got 3 copies of that. Very basic. You can play it on any hero at the table, and that hero gets +1 defense. Later on, there are perfect defense builds that give you bonuses for defending and not taking any damage, and this is still a core staple card for that kind of build. The second upgrade you got was Indomitable, and this lends into the defending. Pay 1 to put it out, and then once you defend against an attack, you discard Indomitable, and you get to ready your hero. So this is a much cheaper way to do it than the Tenacity, and generally protection likes to be able to ready a hero. It goes to show that the way that things were in the beginning of the game that basic cards were more of a supplement, and they tended to be less cost effective than an aspect version of the same or a similar kind of card. You got one type of support with protection. You got med team. Med team, 3 cost support, comes in with 3 counters. It has the keyword of uses. So every time you use the card, you remove a counter, and once all the counters have gone, the card goes into your discard pile. Med team will just straight up heal 2 damage from a character, whether or not that's your hero, an ally. That can be player 2, player 3 at the table, or their allies. However you see the best use of it. Very good card, I suppose. Looking at it, it has a true cost of 4 to heal 6 damage. If you had 3 first aids, which would also heal 6 damage, that's a true cost of 6, because each of them cost 1, plus you're spending the card out of your hand, so you're spending 2 every time to do a first aid, whereas you're spending 4 to do 6 healing over the course of 3 turns. You've got 2 events within protection. So the first one was Get Behind Me. Kind of pairs in with Black Widow and wanting to cancel treacheries. So if a treachery comes out of the encounter deck, you can play Get Behind Me, and instead of resolving the treachery, the villain will attack your hero. Not my favourite card as a personal preference, but it had its place, especially in the core set. The other event you got was Counterpunch. Now, I mentioned before about the likes of Haymaker being able to help you deal the damage when you're trying to be a defender, to help you push your victory condition. Counterpunch is a 0 cost event, and when an enemy attacks you, you get to punch them for your hero's attack. So if you have a base attack of 2, the enemy attacks you, you punch it for 2, and then you can do your defense. Just helps push the damage and helps push you towards your victory condition. Onto aggression. So the resource card again, the power of aggression. Get 2 copies, max 2. Generates a single resource or 2 when you're paying for a red card. You got 2 allies again. You got Tigra, who is a 3 cost 1/2/3 stat line. But whenever she attacks and defeats a minion, she gets to heal a point of damage. It is worth noting that with the order of play, consequential damage always goes on last. So Tigra would already have to have 1 damage on her to heal before she then takes the damage from the attack. So Tigra was a good addition to the aggression archetype back at the beginning of the game. The second ally you had was Hulk. Now, Hulk was a 0 thwart, 3 attack, 5 health for only 2 cost. So, sounds like a no-brainer. He had a very random ability, basically. Whenever Hulk attacks, you flip the top card of your deck and discard it, and depending on what symbol was on it, would depend on what he does. If it was another fist, if it was another physical resource, he would deal an extra 2 damage to any target. So you could split up his 3 attack to a minion and 2 to the villain, or 3 to 1 minion, 2 to another minion, or you could do 3 and then 2 onto a single. there was some flexibility there. But if you if you discarded a lightning, then he deals 1 damage to everything on the field. And that's not just the villains and the minions, that's also your hero and any other allies. He could potentially take out other friendly characters that you don't want to leave play. If you discard a mental resource, a science resource, he just leaves play. So although he's got that low cost, there is always a chance that something bad could happen. If you discard a wild, say from the power of aggression, he would do all 3. So he had his place. Having 5 health, you could put him out in aggression, use him as a blocker for 2 turns. That was a possibility, and I know a lot of players used him that way until you could build decks really around making sure you have that fist resource that you're going to be discarding, in which case he became a massive powerhouse for later builds. You got 1 upgrade with aggression, and that was combat training. Combat training, like the armored vest, you can play on any player, and it just gives that character +1 attack. So adding that to your protection player who's wanting to do counter punch will mean that they're doing more damage. Adding it to your own hero, allowing you to punch the villain harder, helping you win the game faster. Just a very basic upgrade, but very useful. You got 1 support. You got Tac Team, again 3 copies of it. Like Med Team with protection, comes in with 3 counters and uses them. 3 cost support, and you remove a counter to deal 2 damage to an enemy. So you can use them to help bring a minion down within sort of defeating range so that Tigra can help heal. Or you can ping off tough status cards, or, you know, if a minion only has 2 health, you could just Tac Team to remove the minion. A lot of versatility. Expensive for what it does. You're paying 4 cost in total to do 6 damage. But because it has that flexibility, it was a useful enough card, especially early on. You then got 3 events. So you had Uppercut, which was a 3 cost aggression event that deals just 5 damage to an enemy. Now, we just said an effective cost of 4 to deal 6 over 3 rounds with Tac Team is kind of expensive. An effective cost of 4 to deal 5 instantaneous is also kind of expensive. But it did add additional attack events into the attack aspect. Your second event was Relentless Assault, and this was the first card that's kind of started to build on the minion killing aspect. 2 cost, you deal 5 damage to a minion, so you have to have a minion out there to be able to do it. And if you can pay one of the 2 cost with a fist resource, which, you know, combat training and uppercut both are fist resources, the wilds from power of aggression can also be used as the fists. You get to overkill that minion. So if the minion only has, say, a single health Ultron drone, you would deal the 1 damage to the Ultron drone, take that out, and deal 4 damage to Ultron. As I say, definitely started the minion killer archetype off. The third event and the final aggression card that you got was chase them down. Now, chase them down anytime you defeat a minion, it's a 0 cost event, and you can just remove 2 threat from a scheme. Very good way for aggression to remove threat. This is worth noting that you have to defeat the minion. So by you, we are talking about your hero. If Tac Team or Tigra were to defeat a minion or defeat the enemy, you could not play chase them down because it wasn't your hero that was considered doing it. Whereas if you used uppercut or you used a basic activation with your hero, you would be able to trigger chase them down. The final aspect is justice, and again, the resource card was the power of justice. It's the same as the other power of cards. You get 2 copies of it. You receive 2 allies, so you got Jessica Jones, 3 cost, 1, 2, 3 stat line. Seems like low thwart for justice, but she gets +1 thwart for every side scheme that's already in play. So if you're starting on a higher difficulty, say Expert Claw, which will start off with 2 side schemes in play, she can come out and thwart for 3 straight off the bat. So very scenario dependent, but a very useful ally. The second ally you got was Daredevil. So 4 cost for a 2/2 3 stat line. He had a response when he attacks. He gets to remove a threat from a scheme. So again, it's a way of getting some extra damage into your justice build and being able to remove the threat at the same time. You received 1 upgrade of Heroic Intuition. You get 3 copies of it. Again, like Armored Vest and Combat Training, you get to play it on any hero, and it gives them +1 thwart. You did get 2 supports in Justice, so you got Surveillance Team. Like the other shield cards, the Med Team and the Tac Team, Surveillance Team comes in with 3 counts on it, costs 2, and when you remove a counter, you get to remove 1 threat from a scheme. So it gives you the flexibility. You're paying a total of 3 resources for 3 threat removal, but you have the flexibility of drip feeding that throughout time, but also being able to remove it from where you want to remove it. You got 3 copies of Interrogation Room. Interrogation Room was a 1 cost support. You put it into play, and anytime you defeat a minion, so similar to the way that Chase Them Down worked for aggression, if you get to defeat a minion using a basic activation or an attack card that you have in your hero kit, you can exhaust it and remove a threat from a scheme. So again, it drip feeds the threat removal, but it stays on the table. It won't ever leave. The thing that really hurt Interrogation Room is you cannot play it on other players. It doesn't give you the option to play it on another player. Otherwise, you would love to play this onto your aggression player at the table that wants to defeat minions, that wants to defeat enemies. It has to be just for you. So there was a downside to Interrogation Room. You got 2 events in Justice. So you got 4 Justice. 2 cost event removes 3 threat from a scheme. But if you can pay with a mental resource, so we saw this with relentless assault with aggression. If you can pay with that mental resource, which there tends to be a few of those about in Justice, then you get to remove an additional threat. So it's a 2 for 4, 3 true cost for 4 threat removal. Is a pretty good standard even today. Your final event was Great Responsibility. Now, Great Responsibility is a bit of a niche card. It is a hero response, so it's quite difficult to trigger, especially in solo. When threat is placed onto the mains or onto a scheme, you can decide to take it as damage instead. So because when you're in hero form, generally the villain is attacking you and not scheming, in solo it's a hard card to pull off. You can do it with multiplayer. If the other player is flipped down and the villain is going to scheme on them, you can Great Responsibility to take a little bit of damage and prevent that threat from going on. If your hero can recover and can make up for taking that damage, it can be a useful card. There are heroes that do maybe like it as a card, but generally it was very niche. It was very hard to use, especially in solo for the core set. Thank you very much for watching our look into what you receive within the core box of Marvel Champions. If you'd like to join us on Discord, then you'll find the link in the description below. Come in, get conversations going around other games as well as Marvel Champions, or even arrange games remotely of Marvel Champions if that takes your fancy to get into multiplayer plays. Thank you for your support, and until next time, happy gaming.